Thank you, Stanley. So I want to ask you something about that later, okay? Remind me, so I don't forget. Because it's fascinating. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about other stuff, which happens to be what I'm working on these days back in my house. In fact, I haven't been out of the house in weeks, and I've forgotten what people are like. This happens to authors now and again. And I want to start tonight with a reading from, so we're talking about conservatism here. I want to start with a reading from the Gospel according to Paul Weyrich. You all know who this is, right? In your history of conservatism. And this is a quote that I found in a book by Richard Viguerie called The New Right, We're Ready to Lead. This came out in, 1979 or something like that? There's a guy you should have had here at the conference, Richard Viguerie. Anyhow, he's quoting, at the time, his buddy Paul Weyrich. We are radicals who want to change the existing power structure. We're not conservatives in the sense that conservative means accepting the status quo. We cannot accept the status quo. And Weyrich and his friends on the New Right have been, well, they're not new anymore, but they've been saying things like this from that time up until now. You think about the 1994 freshmen in Congress, screaming, shut it down. You think about all of Grover Norquist's metaphors of bloody slaughter, And then my favorite quote of all. Now, I'm sorry if I start to go too long. You just tell me, and I'll shut right up, okay? But my favorite one quote along these lines comes from Jerry Falwell, and this was in 1983, and he was at a memorial dinner for Larry McDonald. Do y'all remember who this was? He was a congressman from Georgia who was on that Korean jet plane that the Soviets shot down. He also happened to be the president of the John Birch Society. And Falwell was at this memorial gathering afterwards. And here's I guess he got really worked up, but he was talking about Larry McDonald's life. And he came up with a metaphor for describing what Larry McDonald was up to, and by extension, what conservatism was up to. And this is how he put it. He said, like Samson, in the Bible, like Samson, some of us are reaching for the pillars. We may not clearly see the way. We may be lacking in wisdom, but we have the will and the confidence in a God who is sovereign and cannot fail, and with whom liberty had its birth, blah, blah, blah. But get this, Larry McDonald was, like Samson, a victim, a prisoner of a society moving to the left. But he never moved with it. He still was looking for those pillars. And at a certain hour on August 31st, 1983, i.e. when the Soviets shot the airplane down, he found those pillars, one with his right hand and one with his left. It's this image of the conservative movement bringing the society down. Not the Soviet Union, bringing the society that he so hated, that was moving to the left, bringing it down with him. And you think about the way these people have ruled in the various government agencies. You think of all the people that Bush and Reagan before him have appointed who are actively hostile to the agency's very existence, and who have no desire to enforce the most basic mandates that they're hired to enforce. We all know about this. And you think of the numerous special offices that they have created over the years to circumvent the regulatory process. And what has been the purpose of all this? What have they destroyed? What have they brought crashing down like Samson? What have they achieved? Well, they haven't achieved conservatism in any sort of, romantic Edmund Burke kind of sense. Like Weyrich said, that's not what they're interested in. They haven't brought us some kind of stronger link with the past, some more powerful sense of community. As culture warriors, I think they've failed almost completely. I mean, culture wars are great material for books like, those bestsellers by Bill O'Reilly and Coulter, that sort of thing. But their place in how conservatives have ruled over the last 27 years has actually been quite small. Where they do put their emphasis, as we all know, where they have succeeded, is in building this laissez-faire economy that everybody's been talking about all day. The economy that consists of cheap labor, free trade, a booming stock market, and economic insecurity for most of us. This is the great conservative achievement. This is what they've given the world, and they're proud of it. They all get together to celebrate it every year at Davos. Indeed, they now think that this order that they have built is so secure that they don't need to justify it anymore, that this is nature itself has given us this thing. And yet there is nothing natural about the laissez-faire order. Now here I'm going to read a really long quote and really waste time, but you all have PhDs, and so I thought I'd bring my volume of Karl Polanyi, The Great Transformation. And as he pointed out in his grand history of his grand history of the laissez-faire idea, which he wrote many years ago, there are certain things that you just can't treat as commodities, because to do this, as the laissez-faire system demands that you do, would eventually result in the destruction of civilization itself. And I already am running out of time, so I'm not going to read it after all. But basically, he talks about that you can't, reduce labor to a commodity, because it is also people and that sort of thing. And he talks about the environment and all of this stuff, which has all turned out to be very prophetic and sad and tragic. And anyhow, this is all a very long-winded way of getting to the point that I came here to make, which is that culturally speaking, the free market system is immensely destructive to tradition and to all our inherited ways of doing things. And this is, if you study economics, this is one of the home truths of the field. Schumpeter called it creative destruction, with the emphasis on the destruction. The social critics of the 1950s, like Vance Packard, used to call it planned obsolescence. But this has always been something that it's been difficult for Americans to get their heads around. And for conservatives, it is absolutely impossible to acknowledge. They reject it. They refuse to think about it. It just simply does not compute to them, because they equate old-time economics with that old-time religion. They just can't imagine that the two don't go together. Now, liberals, for our part, tend to think that we have some kind of special connection with coolness. It's not me here. I'm not cool. That we have some, that we're in tune with the creative class and the image industry. And besides, they always find it a little bit uncomfortable to embrace the things that the laissez-faire system is out there destroying, families and small towns and communities. These are, Squaresville and conformity and the things that we were all supposed to be rebelling against back in the 60s, right? And this is, now you can see that something has gone wrong in my head here, because I've been spending the last few weeks reading Reader's Digest. Huge stacks of them. And the thing that kills me about Reader's Digest, is with this, it has this climate. Y'all remember this magazine it had the largest circulation of any publication in the world at one time, but it had this climate, this air of sunny majoritarianism and the inevitable right-wing politics. And as I'm reading these, I often get to thinking about whatever happened to that, nice middle-class world that the Digest claimed to speak for back in the day. Whatever happened to those honest and prosperous blue-collar toilers who were, always so sick of the dirty hippies and would stand tall for their flag and their country? And the answer is that the system that they voted for, that they put into office, has effectively destroyed them. They don't exist anymore. The economic conditions that made them possible have been erased by the conservative revolution. That old Reader's Digest America that made Ronald Reagan possible was killed off by Ronald Reagan and by his heirs. Now, when I was growing up back in the 60s and 70s, y'all remember this. Sometimes I have to remind myself that people used to actually talk this way, but the great sociological cliche of American life was that we lived in a mass middle-class society, where the differences between white collar and blue collar were differences of style and taste, not differences of income. And there's a guy called Paul Fussell wrote a whole book about this. It's very amusing and vicious and cruel. Anyhow, that's who we were as Americans, right? We were the land of the great middle. And all the kids were rebelling against stifling conformity, and we were all supposed to be, growing up absurd because our abundance didn't feed our soul and that sort of thing. But it's all moot today. I mean, today, the great sociological cliche that everyone on the planet, and I'm not joking about this, but that everybody on the planet can recite this cliche, is not America as the land of shared affluence, but America as the place that tolerates and accepts great extremes of wealth and poverty. This is supposed to be, so deep in our American DNA, the very story of our nation. I mean, everyone in Europe knows this from infinite repetition. America is the example to follow because Americans don't get upset when the boss makes 400 times as much as the blue-collar worker. And it's our easygoing tolerance of extreme inequality that makes Americans who we are. That's what makes us unique among the peoples of the world and so miraculously profitable a place to invest in. So what I'm getting at, what I want you to remember and what I want you to take home from this conference is a fundamental contradiction in conservatism that they can't overcome no matter what they do. That this is a movement that is driven in some ways by nostalgia, right? By these gauzy memories of this small town Reader's Digest ideal where everyone has a nice home and a picket fence. But that world was the product of liberalism, okay? And the conservatives themselves have killed that world out of their dedication to their real God, right? The laissez-faire ideal. You go around to the middle of the country, to what the part of the country that Sherrod Brown was talking about earlier, and look at all the cities and the towns that conservatism has killed, and see what deindustrialization and the rage to escape unions has done to places like Detroit and Cleveland. And you see what the Walmart revolution and the destruction of the family farm have done to the small town Midwest, to places like where I came from. In fact, I was recently out in western Kansas speaking in a town that has lost 50% of its population over the last 20 years. And the town, this guy who called himself the town liberal was driving me around and showing me the sights, such as they were. And we went down their main street, it's kind of classic Reader's Digest main street. And I'll be damned, every single shop was boarded up except for one. And that one was just kept open because the owner is a stubborn guy. And the family farmers are disappearing. And the big box stores have wiped out I'm not, she just told me I only have 30 seconds left. How could I stop? Okay, that's it. No. The family farmers are gone, are on their way out. The big box stores have wiped out the local commerce, and the kids all leave as soon as they learn how to drive. And the town liberal, the guy who's driving me around, is showing me this scene of destruction, in this town. And I said to him, the obvious question: when do you bounce back? When does it end? Remember that Joy Division song? You see, I sit there in the basement, I listen, when does it end? And he said, it doesn't end. It doesn't end. I myself am leaving. He told me he was born in Omaha and he'd had it and he was getting out. And of course, naturally, this town has grown more and more conservative as the years have passed and sunk itself deep into the debates over evolution and abortion and this kind of thing. And I in some ways, that's got to be expected. The only voices of dissent that you ever hear in a place like that are people like Rush Limbaugh. That's the only kind of angry public speech you're ever going to hear. But at the same time, they're also willing to get together as a town and invite me to come out there and talk to them, which is a good thing. And it put me in mind of another great text from the early days of conservatism, another book about the new right. This one was called Thunder on the Right. Do y'all remember this, by Alan Crawford? Nobody reads it anymore, but it's a great book, and it anticipates so many of the things that conservatism has done to us. And in the book, Crawford is wondering why the new right, as they were then called, never tried to reach out to the labor movement, which he thought of as being conservative in the best sense of the word. As he put it, after all, labor is one of the institutions in society and encourages rootlessness and upheaval, the inevitable consequences of the free enterprise that the new right champions. The new rightists have thus become celebrants of change, of rootlessness, of everything that classical conservatisms deplore. So I think that if we are willing to take the present opportunity, it is now liberals who are in a position to stand up for that lost world of decency and equality and fairness. That world that we were all of us born into. That great society, America, that the conservatives deliberately killed off. I mean, they pushed apart the pillars and sent that whole world crashing to the ground. And when I was driving around that town out in western Kansas, it struck me that what the conservatives have given us is, looking at this main street and these dying shops, that what they have given us is civilization in ebb tide, you know, progress in reverse. This isn't the heyday of Ronald Reagan's small town world. This is its annihilation. And so I say, let's drive the contradiction home on these guys. Whenever, over the last 27, 30 years, whenever there was a choice to be made between free markets and free people, between money and the health of society, they consistently chose money. And it's time to make them answer for it. Thank you.